Hello, guys. Thank you for coming. How do you guys like Philly? Yeah, a little rainy, right? I could have been a little more sunny. Thank you guys for staying till 4 p.m. I know it's kind of late. It's a Thursday, but we appreciate you, and we think this is a very high-yield talk, especially because I'm sure you guys know the buzzword for the day is AI, right? Like every talk, right, incorporates AI in some way. So this talk is called Sync or Sync. Think, get it, or sync. And it's about how do you build these successful partnerships if you are a teaching hospital, academic or otherwise, with industry. And so we have we are your three speakers. I'm Andy. I'm one of the Stanford faculty. I do a lot of innovation work, help build informatics AI tools, and also I'm part of our department's partnership program where we actually evaluate and execute on promising industry partnerships. All right.
Dev, also ED faculty, and work very closely with Andy on some of our kind of AI operations related projects, and I spend some time with our hospital data science team once a week or so.
And hi, everybody. My name is Wendy Sun. I'm the second year administrative fellow at Yale.
And there's so much more, so humble. But she does incredible work in the innovation space. So we don't have any disclosures, all right? And then just to get us through the objectives.
Sure. So what we'll talk about today is that we understand kind of some of the key partnership models and the kind of impact they can have. We want to figure out how to apply these best practices in evaluating partnerships, and then learn some actionable strategies to ensure success. And of course, after it's over, happy to take a bunch of questions because this is kind of an evolving topic for a lot of academic centers.
So just to get a sense of who's here, raise your hand if you've collaborated with an industry partner. Oh, wonderful. Okay, so definitely we would, if you have any thoughts or want to share experiences along the way, feel free to raise your hand. But as you know, kind of like on a scale of things, it's a really great collaboration with academic center and industry partnerships just because you're kind of having a synergistic relationship and you're combining research excellence with industry resources, market expertise to drive translational research, clinical validation, and rapid adoption of AI tools. And as you can see on the scale, you can have all sorts of kind of clinician involvement. So on the one hand, you can simply purchase a tool to incorporate in your emergency department. And on the other side of the sliding scale, you could iteratively, do MVPs with the partner in the partnership with industry, improve the model, like build the model, improve the model, customize the model, and study it and, implement it.
All right, so thank you so much. So I love this slide because it shows that the work that you have to do when you are vetting companies is not too different from being a detective. Or dare I say, do any of you guys know what venture capital is? I'm sure some of you guys might be consulting for VC or anyone involved in that space okay, so that's great. And that what venture capitalists do is basically they are detectives in a way, that's the slide, but also their job is to find startups to fund. And as a doctor, that's not typically how we associate our job. But the challenge is that there's a huge bell curve of companies, right? Some are startups in the popular culture sense of literally college dropouts in a garage coming to us in academic medical center to build our AI solution of the future and become a billion-dollar unicorn company, or ideally in their minds. And on the other far side of the spectrum are like these very large pharmaceutical companies that want us to help us develop new drugs, or at least expand the use cases of their drugs, or help identify patients appropriately. And they have a very large budget, but a different governance structure and pathway to partnership. So that's something you have to think about. And so that's why you have to put on your VC cap, your venture capital hat. And another challenge too is you will notice when you're being pitched by companies that there's a lot of smokes and mirrors. So as doctors, I think we shoot straight. We can talk to each other honestly about what the problem is and what we think the solution should be. But in business, there's a lot more smokes and mirrors, and they use charm offensives, big technical jargon, but when you actually peel back the onion, their solution isn't really a solution at all. They're just trying to find a problem and work with you and get some cash. Of course, that's an oversimplification. There's some amazing startups out there, but just keeping you guys aware to be on your toes. And so there's a number of variables you guys have to think about. Number one is, are they solving a problem? So there's a lot of times you have startups coming in, there might be a research interest that they turn into a AI model that solves really a research problem that doesn't translate at all into the clinical domain. And that you have to be very wary about. Number two is the team, right? On the big screen, the best case scenario, college dropouts, they found Facebook, they become billionaires, does not happen in real life for the vast majority of times. And there's actually literature to show that. So there's a study from the MIT Sloan Business School that shows that the average age of a successful entrepreneur is actually in their 40s and their 50s because they've accrued a lot of experience. And also, the people that are approaching you, is there a clinician leader that is part of the executive decision-making group? Because some of the best pitches that we've heard, and we've probably heard hundreds among us, there's always a clinician leader that understands the struggles of an emergency doctor, working the trenches and then integrating their product into the clinical workflow, and that is so important. Number three, so that's the problem, the team, the product. So another thing you have to do and put on your venture capital or detective hat is competitor analysis. Why should I work with this company and not 10 other companies that do very similar work? What is their market share? Are they the leaders, or are they trying to be a little budding startup and they're trying to capture the market, right? That's something you have to really think about, because they might position themselves to you and say, we're the only ones in the game, but you use a business analytics platform and realize that's not true. Another thing you have to think about is a product. Yeah, this is the best thing since sliced bread, but actually, when it's benchmarked by third parties or their peer-reviewed papers show that it's not that great, it's not as exciting. And then the last thing you have to think about is this is the word that we try not to use, I'm sure, as doctors, but we have to, it's the R word, is runway, right? Do you guys know what runway is in venture capital land? It is basically the amount of cash that a company has to support the product that they're trying to implement, right? So not uncommonly, you have a startup that comes to you and says, we have this great technical team, and we are going to build you the product of the future. Let's get started. And you ask them, how much cash do you have in the bank? Oh, we have 5 weeks. I don't know about you guys, but it takes about 2 years, 1 to 2 years to close a deal with a company, especially around an AI solution. And if you pour all this, to get on that point, it takes so much work to work with a startup to build an AI solution. It can take years. You're pouring hundreds of hours of your life into grant writing, NSF, SIPR and SITR grants, NIH grants. You are meeting with stakeholders who are nurses, other doctors, patients, their families, legal, risk review, the IRB, the Epic implementation team, pouring your soul into this product only to find out that, hey, guess what? We knew this 3 months ago, but we're letting you know at midnight through an email that we're actually running out of money. There's nothing more soul-crushing than that, because those are hundreds of hours you could have spent with your family and your friends and doing anything else. And we may or may not be speaking from experience, okay? So that's something to be wary of, and why you have to be thinking in a role other than your typical your clinician hat, which is very powerful. All right.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Getting a little PTSD here. I think we both have some experience in dealing with startups who have a very short runway and trying to get projects off the ground in academic medical centers, and just like, hey, when's this going to happen? When's this going to happen? And the answer is always, it's a process at every academic medical center. But as with every contracting process, the devil is kind of in the details, right? And so you really want to assess 4 main things as part of the contracting evaluation. First thing you want to assess is data rights. Like, who's going to have access to healthcare data to protect the health information? Increasingly, and I have not heard of a single academic medical center that allows data access, but most institutions lock down their PHI and say that, hey, you can, as a startup, you don't have any access to our PHI. If you want to use our PHI, you have to use it within some sort of infrastructure that we control. So for example, at Stanford, we'll set up kind of a virtual machine, some hardware for you that lives within the Stanford ecosystem that members of the startup can potentially log in and get access to, but they're not going to have the ability to export data. Now, there's a big downside with that, in that if you want to build something called a federated model that can rely and benefit from information across multiple institutions, well, as a startup, you can't really do that if you are not even given access to the data to begin with, right? So federated learning models can become a little complicated. You also want to figure out who manages the governance of this AI product. So is it the case that a startup is going to collaborate with an ED department, come in with a solution, and then hand that solution off to the IT department? Say, hey, we've built a solution, but we want your IT department to figure out how to monitor this. They may not know anything about medicine, or how to deploy models, or how to even monitor models, and they may not know what failure modes are. So you'll have to figure out that governance structure and the monitoring structure. Third, publication. So how protected is this information going to get? Ideally, you want some academic freedom and say that, hey, we built this model, we want to put it out there, maybe open source it. But there's downsides to that too. If you open source everything, then you're kind of giving away the secret sauce. You and this company that may be developing a product together, now the moat is a lot smaller, and anybody else can just walk in there and download the code or download the model weights and do it for themselves, potentially even better, right? And that happens with industries across the board. I just read a report this morning that even outside medicine and outside AI, the lithium phosphate batteries that were developed initially in Texas, were not considered to be great, but then Chinese companies took it over, and now they're the largest battery companies in the world. So it happens all the time in many industries. And finally, you want to figure out who controls the IP. And so this is a discussion to be had between your contracts office at your institution and the startup. So there's two kind of big ways about going about this. Licensing, in that you have some sort of agreement where you say, yeah, this product that we've developed together, the startup can go out and use it and potentially use it at other institutions. It's fast, it's easy, but most licensing agreements, the startup has no control of modifying this product. In fact, it's usually pretty explicit and says you can use this model, but you cannot modify it. Whereas if you want to spin something out and do some ownership, then maybe some joint ownership, and then the institution gets some revenue out of the product. The startup may have some, or startup or external entity may have some control in modifying the product, and that's really important for AI models because models generally have difficulty translating from one institution to the other. So it's not the case that we develop something at Stanford, walk across the street to Kaiser, and it will work perfectly just as well as it does at Stanford. It's almost never the case. So you want some ability to modify this product downstream.
So at the end of the day, you're doing your due diligence and you're talking with the co-founders and the reps from the company. Why do we do all of this? So we do this because there is the opportunity to improve patient care with these AI tools. So one example that we did at Yale, and one of the key folks who made it happen, Vic Parwani over there, we implemented Triage Go. Who's heard of Triage Go before? Yeah, so essentially it's an AI tool that incorporates key factors such as, vital signs, mode of arrival, patients' comorbidities, as well as their past medical history, in predicting kind of critical illness and assigning a triage score to it. And so what we found is, and this is the exciting part of being academics and partnering up with industry partners, is that we do research and we do continual assessments of, how these AI tools are working out. And what we found was after implementing Triage Go, we found that the sensitivity and specificity of Triage Go, we were able to better characterize and give patients that assigned score. And as well, it helped raise the acuity level for historically marginalized groups as well. So there was that equity component as well. And I believe Deb and Andy has an example from Stanford.
Definitely. I don't think we can give a lot of details around this project. Very low details, yeah. But we had previously come to an agreement where we were going to work with a pharma company and try to develop a model for them, co-develop a model together. We had a lot of the data agreements in place and the licensing agreements in place. But turns out that there were some concerns about the product to begin with from a regulatory perspective. So overnight, actually, the project was shut down, which is okay. I mean, that happens.
And so we rightfully walked away from, because I think that's one of the beauties of being physicians, right? Is we're always looking out for the patient and their safety and their families. And so I think there is such a need for our colleagues in pharmaceutical companies, of course, but also seeing it through a lens as a physician, right? Are these drugs that are being developed safe for our patients, and do we want to build models around them? And the answer may not be yes, maybe no, and that's okay, because we want to make sure that the most important thing is the integrity of our specialty over everything else.
And with that, we're happy to entertain questions about this process. And I think all three of us have a fair amount of experience here, so happy to lend that out. Yeah.
Is there any good way to look at how much money a company has without directly asking that? Like I've seen like Crunchbase, I don't know like much about it.
I can answer that. So one of my favorite places to look is actually PitchBook.
Yeah.
And if you're part of an academic healthcare system, PitchBook should actually be free if you log in with your institution credentials. And that tells you kind of like how much has been fundraised in each like round of funding, as well as kind of what their predicted exit is, whether it's like an IPO versus merger or acquisition, things like that. And you also get to see like who has invested in them as well. So if you have those connections, you can call up, folks from the VC company. It's like, hey, what are your thoughts on this company?
Yeah, 100%. Those are two of my favorite business platforms, analytics platforms, is Cushy Brains, CB Insights. There's also PitchBook is great too. Have you guys heard of that by any chance? And you know what? Also, I just asked them. I think transparency is so key to any trusting partnership. And so I'll just tell them upfront, hey, how much cash do you have in the bank? And how long will that last you? And on top of that, one thing that I wanted to mention too is, do you have any clients? Right? Do you guys have any paying customers, and are you cash flow positive? Because that's a positive signal for me. But if you don't have that, then that's like, okay, so we're your first customer, you don't have cash in the bank. Well, how much have you raised? You can find that you can always trust but verify, right? That's that aphorism runs so well across all industries. You're telling me you have this much money. Let's just see. There should be some PR, news letters about the money you've raised, and also double check on these platforms. Great question.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll have to say about that is people need to eat, right? And so, like, if they have a 3-person team and they have just added on a 4th person, that's a positive signal. But also recognize that there is a startup cost to startups, meaning that all the legal and the regulatory aspects of this, and lawyers who need to vet contracts can charge thousands per hour. And so if they've been in this game for a couple of months and they are actively hiring, I think that's maybe a good signal. Most companies you can tell just by talking to them and like figuring out the urgency behind how fast they'd like to get on board. Like kind of have a signal on where they sit.
Also, I'm going to add one more thing: is everyone here is, I'm assuming, a doctor, or at least, or someone affiliated in medicine, and just incredibly brilliant, smart people. And so, value your time, right? There's going to be a lot of startups or companies, or X, Y, and Z partner that's going to ask you all these questions. Take your time, about their product or the research. Make sure that you guys get properly compensated for that, because your time is very valuable, and that time could be spent with family. So I think as doctors, we should not feel hesitant to be fairly compensated and get your fair share.
Yeah.
In the situations that you guys mentioned in terms of like where you're maybe co-developing with them, I think it's easier potentially for you to ask to take a look under the hood, right? But what about those instances where maybe we're not co-developing and they might be a little reticent to share that? What are some of your suggestions for how to, break that mold? Because you should know how it works, right? If you're going to be partnering with them.
I would be hesitant to deploy something at my institution without getting a lot of details around how this works. And you're right in that a lot of companies will approach institutions, say, we have this XYZ product, whatever, would love to deploy it. And the first question is, okay, like, how's this work? There are ways of sharing that information through a contracted process. They say that, hey, like, you have to tell us how this works, otherwise we're just never going to move forward. But whatever you tell us and whatever deployment, more importantly, the deployment that you would place on our Stanford servers will be automatically deleted when this arrangement is over. And most companies are like, when it's in writing, they're like pretty reasonable.
And I feel like this is kind of like an emerging space as well. Like there's definitely opportunities to develop like, project proposals that would hit key aspects. So, we're at different institutions the other day, we're just talking about like, what does your proposal look like when you're presenting, a startup or like an organization to your academic center? And we don't have something standardized now. So it's definitely, opportunities for collaboration.
And then other things are hopefully there's peer reviewed. At the very least, there's manuscripts that show that when it's benchmarked against X, Y, or Z, or that there has to be some credible evidence, hopefully at a like institution, that this is a viable solution. And if they can't even provide that, which a lot of companies are, to be frank, frustrated by because they want to move so quickly, and yet we have an obligation to our patients, right? So make sure that anything we deploy is safe for them, and then also can be reproducible at other institutions. It's generalizable data. So I think that's where that integrity and our training is so important for having these negotiations.
You talked about co-developing products, AI solution together. Any insights or pitfalls of a company who has a product, not necessarily looking to deploy with you, but looking to do research at your institution using the product?
Yeah, I guess let me speak about that. We are going to start a clinical trial soon in a similar kind of situation. Um, Months, maybe almost more than a year ago, when we started talking about a potential trial, I was very explicit in saying that whatever product you've developed has to live within our ecosystem. So whether that's you're bringing literal hardware into our department that we have control over, or that your product is living in a virtual machine within the SHC kind of like managed hardware, like it cannot live outside our ecosystem. And so I think just being super upfront about that from the beginning lets them decide whether they want to move forward. And if it's a red line for SHC to have PHI export, like it will never happen. And so most companies understand. It's like this is not even me. You just like kind of mirror it to your institution, say, hey, this is an institutional policy. Like, hey, I can't do anything about this, right? And you really, truly, you can't. And so starting with that, I think, was very helpful for us.
And I think Dev brought up a really important point, because we've had instances where, they don't pass that stage where they're able to, compromise with or agree to the academic institution standards. And so that's, when sometimes these partnerships could fail.
And then especially around like hardware, you just want to make sure that it's been properly vetted, it's been cleared by the FDA, or it has gone through clinical trials to show that it is safe to use on your patients. Or if they're trying to do that with you, make sure that at least the preceding steps have been done. Yeah. So thankfully, that portion is pretty standardized. Any other questions?
And last thing I'll add to that, it's a good question. Last thing I'll add is sometimes you're working with a company that may not have millions and millions in the bank and wants to get a small clinical trial off the ground. And they often want to know, if this trial is successful, will you adopt this? And the price of the trial per patient may not translate into the price of the deployment per patient. So you kind of have to be clear about that upfront too. Say, hey, like we're co-developing this, and we're working on a trial together. But if this is successful, it doesn't mean that our contracts office is going to give you the same exact quote unquote discount for this, right?
Should get started on our next talk.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we're going to get started on our next talk. We're still your speakers, so it works out really nicely. Let me just, actually, a smarter person can help us much smarter in terms of more experienced.
Well, thank you for
Yeah,
coming
thank you
to the
guys so
talk.
much.
We do have a 7-minute break, so if you want to grab some water, come back. We're going to get started at 4:30.
Oh, we
But thank you for coming. There's a 2-minute.
Oh,
break, yeah.
oh, gotcha. Thank you guys so much.